Hey everybody, Walt Dickinson here, founder, brewer, Wicked Weed Brewing. And I want to talk to you today about a really special project, something that has kind of been a career dream for me, to be able to produce a beer like this, and something that really kind of reaches back to the ethos of the company and kind of the core of what inspired us to make the sour program and do what we did. And that's lambic, and that's that's a beer of spontaneous fermentation made in Belgium with over a century of tradition. It's a beer that is made in the Zen Valley there in Brussels. Is just like champagne, right? It's got a very specific region, and it's a beer made of spontaneous fermentation. So spontaneous fermentation meaning that they're taking the beer, and instead of cooling it using a glycol chiller and pitching yeast to it, they're putting it out into basically like a giant baking sheet, which cue the video of our awesome cool ship room. And basically you're putting it out in that into the night air in the winter and allowing the natural yeast in the air to settle on the beer and produce a fermentation. Along with that, just like many things in Europe and old world tradition, there's a specific way it is made, right? It's the way they make it is, it starts in the cool nights of the winter, right, in a spontaneous fermentation using a very specific grain build, which is basically just wheat and barley, and a long brewing process to do that. They cool it in the night air. Then they use aged hops instead of fresh hops, which is something we've been doing here for a while at Wicked Weed. I think aged hops lend a really beautiful character to the beer that's not really repeatable without using it. And then what they do is they go through that cooling in the night air, and then once it's done and all the yeast is in the beer, it hasn't fermented yet, they move it into oak barrels. And then it spends its whole life in an oak barrel. So most beers that we make, even the sour beers, they all go through a stainless steel fermentation, which is a traditional stainless steel tank that we all use now in modern brewing to make beers. This being very old world, it never touches steel until we'll put it in a tank right at the end to go into a bottle. But other than that, it's basically spending its whole life of fermentation in an oak barrel. So we put it into that oak barrel, and then we set it, and we don't touch it for, depending on where it ends up being used in the blend, for 1, 2 to 3 years. Okay, so every beer that we produce has the potential of aging for 3 years. Sometimes we'll use it a little younger, because the tradition of the beer is that after you've got 3 years worth of stock, right? You've produced for 3 seasons, you've let it age every year progressively. You go back and you blend 3-year-old barrels with 2-year-old barrels with 1-year-old barrels to produce a beer that is really dynamic and really beautiful and really fruit expressive without any fruit in it. And that is the first beer I pour in the glass, which is, they call it a goose, right? But we're not making goose, and we're not making lambic. We're making beer inspired by lambic. It's absolutely letter of the law lambic. If they were making champagne, right, they would call it méthode champenoise. So I guess you'd kind of call this like méthode lambic, but it's not really a recognized term. So what we're doing is just doing it in that tradition because we think it's the most beautiful, and kind of, we're always looking in this company to do something old to create something new, like looking at history and looking at like that true storytelling and the culture and the tradition of things that are inspiring us, and using that as a touchstone to do something new. And this is, I think, the most traditional thing we've ever done, in that we're doing the same thing that the first lambic producers started doing in the late 1800s, right? So with that, I'm holding in my hand right now a bottle of Blend 1. As you can see, she's gonna shoot some video, but the labels are gorgeous. It's a collaboration with Howell Golson, our artist. We really wanted to create something that was very high-end feeling, very artistic, very much like wine. And I think our labels turned out beautifully. There's 3 labels that reflect 3 blends, okay? So I know this is like a long video and kind of getting complicated, but I think it's better to just talk about the whole process and what we were able to achieve, because we did produce 6 beers out of this. So this is what the beer looks like before fruit. And with each blend, we created 3 individual blends that reflected the regionally inspired fruits that we would eventually add to them. So first of all, we'll talk about Blend 1. This was our blackberry, and that was aged in the same barrels, blended. And then what we did is we basically blended a beer that we thought really reflected the character of a blackberry. And we blended it as this base beer, and then we took 50% of it and we bottled it just as is, right? And that gets the label that doesn't have any color on it. And then I'm gonna go ahead and open this guy now. We took the other 50% and we re-fermented it on local blackberries. And then we used 2 other fruits, which I'll get to here in a second. But what that does is it allowed us to kind of try and create 3 different ways of expressing what the base beer could do, what this beautiful kind of stock, this really fruity, gorgeous base kind of lambic, right, that we blended together, what that would do, and it allowed you to see how different the barrels are, because I think that's the coolest thing about this project is, you know, we've gotten so good at making sour beer that it's actually like incredibly consistent. And I think the coolest thing about Spontaneous is that we have so little control over the process. So every single barrel is a completely unique experience for us. So in blending, we just have so much more variability and so much more interest. And we wanted to use that to kind of have a point of reference. So when you taste blend 1, blend 2, and blend 3, that again are reflecting the fruits, and those fruits being blackberries in blend 1, peaches, South Carolina peaches in blend 2, and then the North Carolina straight fruit, red muscadines in blend 3, you can really taste the uniqueness of the blending process, of our vision of how we were trying to put that base blend together before we added the fruit. And each of those beers without the fruit tastes uniquely different. And when I taste them, I do see the expression of the fruit coming through just through the blending process. So a 4-year project. I didn't talk about the last piece of making it, which is once we blend it. So I'm gonna start blending again for the 2020 release of Spontaneous of Cultura. We're gonna start blending here in the next couple weeks because it's almost December, or it's November, and we'll go ahead and let it rest in the bottle and go through another year of fermentation in the bottle until it's ready to release. And that's the tradition, right? So this is something we're looking forward to producing every year. I think now that we've done this, you'll see more things coming out of our Cool Ship and our Spontaneous program. But Cultura is absolutely the pinnacle of what we've been able to do here in the sour program at Wicked Weed. I couldn't be more excited. And it's the beer of the restaurant, right? So if you haven't had a chance to go to Cultura, the restaurant, this beer is extremely featured there. And we wanted to showcase a place where we could show you what the kind of pinnacle of what we can do in beer is, the pinnacle of what we can do in food and beverage and the consumer experience, put that all together and just, you know, show you that beer can be something very special. I mean, I think that's the coolest thing about beer is that it can be, you know, drinking a light lager on a boat in the sunshine, or a burst, you know, on the beach sometime, or it can be something as romantic and as beautiful with such history and a story that works so well with food like Cultura. And I think that beer is the most diverse alcoholic beverage on the planet, and we're so lucky to have such a big canvas to paint on, right? So cheers to you guys. Thanks for being patient, and cheers to my whole team who's worked their ass off. I mean, there's not one person in this company who didn't bust their ass to make this beer happen, and I couldn't be more proud of the results. So get your hands on some bottles. Cheers.